Can you tell us just the main takeaway from this trial, the main results, and how this may change treatment regimens and the way that you approach TB treatment in the future?
The main takeaway is the study found three alternatives to the standard of 18 to 24-month standard of care that are 9 months in duration, that use five or fewer drugs, and that can be used in all age groups, regardless of pregnancy. So this is the first peer-reviewed publication of all oral regimens that are available to all age groups with rifampin-resistant tuberculosis. It means that treatment can be shorter and the toxicity potentially reduced for people with rifampin-resistant TB, regardless of age. It offers multiple options, two from the endTB trial and one from a prior trial called the TB Practical trial that can now be purchased for $400 or less. And this is a far cry from the $1 million price tag to treat rifampin-resistant tuberculosis in the 1990s in New York City. And the trial really reveals the benefits in global health of these partnerships among universities, non-governmental organizations, and long-term investments in them by philanthropic and government donors.
Yeah, wonderfully spoken, wonderfully said. And would you be able to conclude that this is also a more likable option for patients and that they were more willing to participate in this trial because it was less, stress inducing on their bodies, the adverse effects were less?
It's a really interesting question, Sophia. I do think that was an important decision when people considered participating. So they had a very high chance of being randomized into one of the shorter regimens. And we used a particular form of randomization that actually increased the chance that people would be randomized to better performing regimens by using data that accumulated during the course of the study. And so I do think that probably did contribute to willingness to participate in the trial. I regret that we do not actually have data on the experience of trial participants and how they felt while they were receiving the regimens. We have very, very detailed reports of measurements of adverse events, but
Is there anything else that you would like to add before I let you go?
I guess the one other thing I would just add, Kristen, in how these findings might influence treatment guidelines and clinical
Mhm.
practice, I think it's really nothing short of a sea change for the treatment of MDR-TB. So I already mentioned the duration difference. I mentioned the much lower price of these regimens, the simplicity for their delivery relative to longer regimens. The World Health Organization has already recommended these three non-inferior regimens in their rapid communication last year and will include them in full guidance upcoming later this year. There is more work that needs to be done to understand the relative advantages of these three endTB regimens and the five other regimens that are recommended by the World Health Organization. It is unlikely that there will be studies that compare them directly to each other in a prospective patient population. And so we need to use novel epidemiologic methods to do that in a systematic way and get valid results to try to understand the relative advantages and disadvantages. But in the meantime, there are now five options of treatment with five drugs or fewer for 9 months or less that can be used. And four of these can be used regardless of age and pregnancy. And the last thing I would just say on this point is that the results from the endTB trial have not yet been evaluated by the normative groups that provide guidelines for the US and Europe. So it's the US CDC and the American Thoracic Society and a few other groups. And that will be an important next step for guidance.